They call him Sebastian now. If you've ever passed a house, too quiet, with curtains that never move, he might still be there. Not resting, not hiding, just waiting for a reason to rise again. This is not your typical vampire story. It's not about blood or monsters. It's a mirror held up to those who chase immortality, thinking the grass is greener beyond the grave. But what waits there isn't life without death, it's death without purpose. Chapter 1. The Elder in the Garden. They call me Sebastian now. A simple name, the kind whispered by neighbours behind the veil of hedges, the kind that fits neatly on a letterbox, not carved in stone, not howled through battlefields. Just Sebastian. A man who lives quietly in a modest house at the edge of a village that's grown fat with forgetfulness. The house is old, but not ancient. Brick, not stone. A porch with faded wood. A roof that creaks. A door that hasn't been locked in decades. Ivy clings to the walls like memory. I never invite anyone in. I don't need to. They deliver parcels, trim the front hedge. Someone mows the lawn every Sunday. I've never asked who. No one knocks twice. No one stays long. They sense it. The wrongness. The cold. It's better this way. They think me eccentric. A relic with thinning hair and heavy eyes. They don't see the shadow behind my gaze. The weight that never shifts. They don't know that behind the curtains I have sat in the same chair for over a century, unmoved by time, untouched by the world. I do not sleep because I'm tired. I sleep because I fear what I might do if I did not. Once I was someone. Once I mattered. I was born Sebastian Virel of House Virel, a noble name, draped in silk and whispered across courtyards. I walked with pride, spoke with certainty. I was not good. I was not cruel. I was sovereign. And then came the night. A carriage wheel cracked in the dark. I remember the cold of the mud, the howl that wasn't wind, and a figure, gaunt and silent, watching from the tree line. They didn't pounce. They glided. And when their hand touched my throat, it was like frost laced with fire. They didn't feed. Not fully. They tasted. Then they left me. Not slain. Not saved. Just changed. I died in that ditch, but something lingered. Something waited. And when the sun rose, I was already gone. Risen, not resurrected. I returned the next night with eyes that did not blink and a thirst that did not end. I fed, without hesitation, without guilt, and I grew. I discovered strength in shadow. I crossed rooftops without sound. I stood on cathedral spires and laughed at the notion of heaven. I ruled without crown or court. I was an elder, not by ceremony, but by instinct. The others felt it. They yielded. I walked through cemeteries barefoot. I silenced armies. I drank the screams of tyrants and poets alike. I was not evil. I was eternal. Power was not the drug. The drug was clarity. I saw the world as it was, not as they pretended. Frail, pretending at permanence, screaming against the dark. And I was the dark. But time is not an enemy. Time is erosion. The hunger faded, not sated, just bored. Victories grew smaller. Blood lost its taste. Art lost its colour. Even cruelty grew dull. I lived long enough to watch my own shadow stretch thin. Now I sit in a chair that groans beneath me. I drink tea I do not need. I watch the sun set and do not flinch. They think I am resting, but I am waiting. For what? I do not know. I have not fed in 72 years, not out of virtue, not out of guilt, But because I have no desire, I am the immortal robot, a thing that cannot die, and therefore has no values. And yet I fear death, not the fire, not the sun, not the stake, but what comes after. I know what waits beyond this body, beyond this shell. I have seen the whispers in dreams. I have heard his name in the places where shadows hum. Nocturna, the god of vampires, the father of hunger, the devourer of remembrance. If I die, I do not sleep. I descend to his realm, to his feeding grounds, where this I, is torn apart and folded into the eternal appetite, where even memory is chewed and swallowed. There is no freedom there, only need. So I do not feed, and I do not die. I simply sit, not alive, not dead, not suffering, just silent. And that, perhaps, is the worst fate of all. Chapter 2. The Throne of Bones. There was a time I thought this silence was strength, a time when stillness was not surrender, but poise, when waiting was not weariness, but control. I sat then, as I sit now, but I did not sit alone. I sat upon bodies. I stood above battlefields I did not fight in. I walked through cathedrals stripped of their crosses, through cities hushed by my presence alone. I fed on kings and killers, on mothers who wept and monsters who begged. I drank not for survival, but because I could. That was power, not necessity, not hunger, dominance. I remember a night, not the exact one they blur now, but one of the many where I stood at the centre of a ruined village, blood still warm beneath my boots. I had drained every living thing within a mile. Children, dogs, priests, soldiers, all of them. Their final screams still clung to the air like morning mist. And I laughed, not with madness, not with cruelty, with clarity. The world had always pretended at fairness, but I had peeled it back to its truth. The strong rule, the weak feed them. This was nature, unpainted. I had no need to apologize. I was eternal. I was an elder. I believed then that immortality was the prize, the final victory. To no longer be a thing that could be threatened, to stand above time itself. But time does not kneel. Time does not rage. Time waits, and it erodes. At first, I thought it was the blood that dulled. Perhaps the world had become blander. Perhaps their fear was thinner, their lives less vivid. I told myself the centuries had emptied the world of worthy prey. But it was not the world that dulled. It was me. I began to wonder, not aloud, never aloud, why I fed at all. I could go weeks without hunger, then months. I tested it once, a full year, then 2. No thirst, no madness, no decay. I did not need blood to survive, only to feel alive. But if one cannot die, why feel alive? What does a being with no end, no risk, no death actually need? The question crawled through me like rot beneath marble. What needs does the undying have? What meaning can exist for something that cannot lose? And the more I asked, the more I unravelled. Every choice I had made, every indulgence, every cruelty, every conquest, all of them rested on the premise that I had something to gain or lose, that I was gambling with life, even if the odds were always in my favour. But what happens when the game is removed? When nothing you do matters because nothing can take you from the board? Then power becomes parody, desire becomes dust, and eternity becomes a locked room where the door is gone, but the walls remain. I became quiet, not in action, but in essence. I did not rage, I did not weep. I simply stopped. I stopped feeding, not out of morality, not guilt, not some late blooming remorse, but because the act had become meaningless. Blood is a currency of need, but I had none. That was when I first understood what I was becoming. Not a god, not a devil, but something far worse. An echo. A figure still moving out of habit, long after the world had stopped asking him to. I remembered a passage once, something I read when I still believed men had wisdom. It described a creature, not human, something mechanical, immortal, a being that could not be hurt, could not die, and thus had no reason to act. Because if nothing is at stake, then nothing can have value. If you cannot be harmed, then you cannot need. And if you cannot need, then what can you want? What purpose remains? I do not remember where I read it. Perhaps I never did. Perhaps I simply recognize myself. Because I'm that thing now, not a man, not a monster, but a relic without reason. And still, I do not die. Because I know what waits for me beyond the veil. Not peace, not silence, but Nocturna. He, the god of vampires, he who feeds not on bodies, but essence. We were not made to live, we were made to ripen. He gave us this power, not as a gift, but an investment. Each victory, each feeding, each year we endure without rotting. It all sweetens the taste. He feeds best on those who have lived longest. The feeding grounds are not a myth. I have seen them in fractured dreams, a place of shadow where the strongest elders are torn apart. Slowly, beautifully, their memories unwinding like silk into his open mouth. That is why I do not die. That is why I do not move, because I will not be his feast. He made me, yes, but I have become something else, something even he did not foresee. A being without hunger, without movement, without yield. I am no longer a subject of the dark. I am its refusal, and so I sit, and the world forgets me, and Nocturna starves. Chapter 3. What survives and what remains. There is a difference between living and surviving. I see it now, as I sit and watch the ivy reclaim the porch. I see it in the children who pass the gate and dare each other to knock. I see it in the men who deliver their parcels and speak too loudly as they leave, as if volume will drown out instinct. They survive, just as I do, but living, that is something else. I have not lived in a long time, and I do not mean pleasure. I do not mean joy. I mean purpose, the kind that shapes a man's choices, defines his values, and says, "This is who I am." Once, I thought survival was enough. Once, I thought the point of power was to remain longer than others, louder than memory. But now I understand that life, in its truest form, is not mere breath or blood, or years stretched into centuries. It is moral purpose, to live as a being who chooses, not who endures. And that is where my prison lies. Because I endure, I breathe without need, I exist without aim. I have become unmade, not by violence, but by vacancy. And yet I do not die, because death is no better. To die is to descend into Nocturna's realm, to be unravelled, not erased, but fed upon. Slowly, eternally, I would become what he made me for, a long-brewed wine poured into the throat of a god who calls it worship. That is not rest. That is not end. That is consumption without self. So I do not feed, and I do not fall. I remain, And in this fragile, breathless balance, I begin to see what I am. Not a coward, not a relic, but the final echo of what life meant before all of this, before immortality, before hunger, before the shadow whispered that I was more than man. I am not lonely because I am alone. I am lonely because I've met everyone and found no one worth standing beside. Other elders. They gorge themselves like cattle fattening for slaughter. They pretend at glory, but they are ruled by appetite. They feed to silence the truth they refuse to face, that they are no longer real, no longer sovereign. They are wineskins waiting to be poured. And the humans, they beg for immortality without understanding its price. I have seen them claw at old tomes, strike bargains with things older than fear itself, just for a few more decades. They think eternal life is the gift. It is not. It is a test, and they always fail. They see years as proof of greatness. But what is 1,000 years spent drifting? What is survival without creation, without clarity? Time is not the measure of a man. Choice is. I chose to stop feeding, not out of guilt, not out of virtue, but because feeding became survival, and survival became stagnation. And I am not made for rot, but I cannot die either, because dying would be worse. Dying would mean becoming part of him, part of Nocturna. I would be taken into the feeding grounds, a place where elders go not to rest, but to be devoured slowly, where every memory, every earned triumph, every defiant whisper is savoured and stripped away. He loaned us power, not to elevate us, but to deepen our flavour. We are his harvest. That is why he made us long-lived. That is why the strongest among us are the ones who scream the longest in his grasp. And I was among the greatest. I know what I would taste like to him. I know what I carry. And I will not be his feast. So I remain here, between two graves. One physical, one spiritual. To feed again would be to forget who I am. To become one of the cattle. To die would be to lose who I was. To let him peel me apart like a well-aged fruit. So I do neither. Not because I'm strong, not because I'm afraid, but because in this stillness, in this choice, I find a sliver of something I once understood. Integrity. The world calls me lonely, but loneliness, true loneliness, is not the absence of people. It is the absence of equals. There are none left, not among the elders, not among the mortals. And so I sit, not because there is nowhere to go, but because there is no one to walk beside. And until I find something worthy of standing with me, I will not rise. I would rather sit forever in silence than move one step in the wrong direction.
For those who connect with the words of Professor Shadow, for those the stories touch, deeper. The Vault holds more: full audiobooks, Secret Lore, the Becoming the Professor course, the Eldritch Codex. New tales added weekly, only for those ready to go deeper. Click the join button below and unlock the Vault.
Chapter 4. But it was not always silence. There was a time, not recent, but not so long ago I have forgotten, when the walls nearly broke. I had gone too long without feeding. The old pulse began to stir, that rhythmic whisper in the back of the mind that once sounded like desire, and later like decay. And in the same breath, the other urge returned, the temptation to step into the sunlight, to end it, to fall to the fire and vanish before he could take me, to escape the weight of it all. Two instincts, two lies. One said, feed and forget. The other said, burn and be free. and for a moment I was at the edge of both. But I did not feed, and I did not fall, because in that moment I remembered a truth sharper than any blade, the only command I have ever obeyed without being ordered, the moral directive. It came not from instinct, not from duty, but from thought. I whispered it to myself that night, not aloud, but inward, as one might recite a final vow before death. You must not feed. You must not die. You must not surrender to Nocturna. Choose, not by instinct, not by fear, not by duty. Choose the self, or choose the void. And I knew then what I had become. If I fed, I became a beast. If I died, I became a servant. If I chose neither, if I simply endured, out of habit, out of apathy, out of cowardice, then I was no longer in conflict, no longer alive, a monument to nothing, a coward who would not burn and would not live. That is the line I walk now. Not survival, not strength, but fidelity, to a version of myself that once knew what it meant to stand for something, to act not for gain, but for truth. That man is gone, but his vow remains. I live by it now, if live is still the word. I sit here, not because I'm lost, but because I'm chosen. The silence is not weakness, it is discipline. The hunger is not punishment, it is proof. And the loneliness, it is not emptiness, it is integrity. So long as I remain here in thought, in resistance, I am still Sebastian Virel. Not food, not fire, not nothing, but me. And until the world offers me a better choice, I will remain. Chapter 5. The choice they do not see. I see them. Every day they walk past the gate, faces lit by screens, eyes dim with routine. I hear the tired cadence of their lives in the rhythm of their footsteps. They speak of groceries, meetings, bad weather, and better weekends. I see them through the glass, and I see their choices. Not life and death, not hunger or fire. No, theirs is quieter, but not simpler. They wake with a question, though few ever speak it aloud. Do I rise today to become more, or do I survive just enough not to break? It is not so different from my own question. Mine is louder, perhaps, sharper, but not more important. We are all, in the end, faced with a single choice, to become or to dissolve. I once thought mortals had it easier, that their brevity gave their days meaning, that death made everything matter. But I see now that most of them do not live under the pressure of time. They live beneath the weight of fear, the fear that if they try and fail, they will lose the illusion of safety they've made for themselves. So they don't try, they do not create, they do not risk, they do not step into greatness because they might stumble. And in doing so, they choose emptiness. They work jobs they hate. They love people they resent. They silence the voice that once whispered, "You could be more." And they call it maturity, or realism, or patience. But I know what it is. It is the same force that presses against my own chest. It is the voice that says, "Don't reach, don't rise. It's easier to stay still." I live beside them, though they do not know it. A spectre with the same dilemma. They wake wondering if they should give up. I wake wondering if I should disappear forever. They ache from the boredom of their routines. I ache from the weight of knowing I am capable of more, but must not move, must not fall, must not feed. They numb themselves with distractions. I numb myself with silence. They say things like, "It's too late for me," or "I'll start tomorrow." I said once, "Perhaps I will rise today," and then I didn't. But here's the difference. They choose nothing, thinking it is safety. I choose stillness, because I refuse to become something I am not. They surrender before they begin. I endure because the alternative is worse. I have lived long enough to see the pattern etched into every age. Most people do not fail. They refuse to begin. They bury their potential beneath comfort and call it survival. But survival without purpose is not life. It is a soft death, one that never screams. And so I sit, as they do, but I do not pretend. I know what I'm doing. I know what I am not doing. That knowledge is agony, but it is also clarity. They could have been artists, warriors, builders of something eternal, but they traded it for a schedule and a salary and a sigh at the end of every day. They could have become, but they chose to drift. And if there is a hell outside of Nocturna's maw, it is a life unlived, a self never reached. They fear the pain of trying, but they never feel the deeper ache, the one that comes from knowing you could have been something vast. And I, monster, relic, shadow, I understand them. I am them, but unlike them, I know what I've chosen. I live beside the void. I do not run from it. I look into it every day and say, "Not yet. Not until I know it will not consume who I am. Not until I have fulfilled what I was meant to be, or proved, beyond all doubt, that nothing remains. Until then, I will not move, but I will remember. And in remembering, I remain." Chapter 6. The choice remains. The house still stands. It leans slightly now, though no one notices. The porch sighs beneath the weight of time, and ivy has climbed higher than it did last year. The roof tiles have shifted with the wind. A window remains forever half-shuttered. The curtains never open. The mail still comes. The hedge still gets trimmed. Children still dare each other to run past the gate, laughing too loud to hide the unease. And behind the windows, in a room no one enters, he waits. Sebastian Virel. He does not move. He does not feed. He does not die. He is not asleep. He is not gone. He is thinking. Still, you see, it was never a story about a vampire. Not really. It was never about blood or immortality, or gods who devour from beyond the veil. It was about choice, the choice each of us faces. Every day, in 1,000 quiet moments, we pretend do not matter, to rise or retreat, to build or surrender, to become or dissolve. Most people will never be bitten in the dark, but they will be tempted by comfort, by fear, by silence. They will feel the slow death of routine, the soft decay of never asking more of themselves. They will think they have time, and then one day they will wake and wonder if they've already become something less than they were meant to be. Not evil, not broken, just unfinished. Like him, we are not vampires, but we too can become immortal robots, beings who go through motions without meaning, who survive without purpose, who choose neither the void nor the fire, and in doing so, become monuments to nothing. But there is another way, to choose the self, to risk everything in order to become everything, to live with hunger, not for blood, but for clarity, for creation, for becoming more than what yesterday allowed. If you walk past a house one day, old, quiet, forgotten, and you see the curtains drawn too tightly, perhaps he is still in there, still refusing to feed, still refusing to fall, still choosing, day after day, the only thing that ever truly mattered, to remain himself, because the other options, survival without purpose, or death without integrity, would mean surrendering the last thing he has, his self. And maybe that's the only real lesson here. Not how to live forever, not how to avoid pain, but how to make a choice that leaves you intact, even if the world forgets you, even if no one stands beside you, even if you must sit in silence for a century. If the choice keeps you you, then it was never silence. It was victory.